Next item is 6.11, 10:30 a.m., consideration of an update on the broadband action planning process by CBG Communications, Inc. This is from the admin office, and we have Deputy CAO Matthew Rothstein.
Yes, good morning, supervisors. It's a privilege to again be here with you. On December 20, 2022, your board adopted an agreement with CBG Communications Incorporated for broadband action plan consulting services in the not-to-exceed amount of $245,000. You will recall Tom Robinson of CBG, their chief executive officer, appeared before your board on that date. A summary of CBG's actions and progress to date was attached to your board's agenda and available for public inspection. And Mr. Robinson and members of the CBG team are here to make a presentation and answer your board's questions and discuss next steps. Administrative office staff are likewise available, and we'll look forward to any discussion and/or direction. Tom, welcome, and thank you for being here. And thank you for your team's important work so far.
All right. Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, members of the Board of Supervisors, for giving us the opportunity to speak with you this morning. My voice is at a fairly low timbre. Millions of people across the country are suffering from major allergies. It's been kind of a crazy season. We prepared a PowerPoint presentation for you, and most of it is depictions of maps and those kinds of things, hopefully to give you an idea of the progress we're making on the broadband plan update, how it's already leading into some of the rudimentary facets of the implementation plan, and then talk about at the end next steps, and then open it up for questions. Again, with me today is Dick Nielsen. He's our senior engineer, and Christine Rivers, who's our senior research associate. Dick is spearheading the effort on the deployment side, looking at broadband deployment, and Christine on the digital equity side, looking at broadband adoption. Dick, if you take us to the first slide, one of the things that we've done is developed an interactive map. I'm going to let Dick just take you through just a couple, three things on the map, but it'll show you the depth and breadth of what we're starting to populate the interactive map with. And it's allowing us to do the kind of detailed analysis that we believe will be important in determining what's the best path forward for expanding deployment of broadband in Lake County, and then also what are the areas where we need to target our efforts related to enhancing broadband adoption. So Dick, go ahead.
Okay, make sure I'm not muted. Okay, obviously this is a map of the county, Lake County, and this allows us to do multiple things. It allows us to bring in different layers with different information. And I'll just start by, showing you a couple of these, the broadband providers. And I want to kind of hesitate right there for a minute. We keep talking about broadband, and broadband is a defined term. Now, there are different definitions, but generally broadband means faster internet service, right? So oftentimes when we're talking about broadband, it maybe isn't broadband in the true sense. And what I mean by that, I've got AT&T turned on here, and you can see AT&T pops in. A lot of what they have out there now is coaxial based. It's not broadband by any of the major definitions. So I do show that they're out there. You're probably more than aware of them being there. And then we can turn on other layers, like this one is Mediacom. All the purple shows where Mediacom is. And they're, depending on the definition, they're really one of the few, if not the only, true broadband provider. I'm not going to go through all of these, obviously, for time's sake, but you can turn on and off all of these things. Again, you can just see them coming in, and that helps us to analyze, the availability, where is broadband available, and then we can also turn on, and I'll show you another slide of it in a minute, we can turn on adoption slides and equity related slides. So that gives you an idea of how we can work with the interactive part of the map. Now I've got some static maps that I'm going to show just to, again, give you a little bit of a basis, knowing that we're not covering everything that we're working on by any stretch of the imagination. But what this slide is showing is, again, you can recognize your county. Coming up from Napa County, this orange line on both sides of the lake. That's the state's middle mile. The state is in the process of having a middle mile network built throughout the state. And that's the main pipe. That's kind of the freeway, if you will. And then from there, we take off all of the more local roads feeding out into the neighborhoods throughout the county. But that has to be in place.
Dick, excuse me. I think you're still on the interactive map.
Oh, didn't I switch? Doggone it.
Yeah, you didn't switch. Go ahead.
All these years later, and I still forget that. Very simple. Here we go. Okay, I'll go back just real quick. The
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
Yep. The orange line is this the middle mile I described. So that's kind of the freeway, right? And that's bringing all of the information throughout the state, and then we branch off from there to add broadband to different neighborhoods throughout the county and that type of thing. So just letting you know where that is. This map gets real busy, and this is kind of why I went with static maps or single maps. This is showing all of the different availability, speed availability. And some of them, the first probably half of this chart over on the left is showing you less than broadband speeds. And then as you get up into the 50 to 100 is right on the tip of broadband. You got to get really up into the blues and the purples before you get to what is commonly referred to as broadband today. And I'll leave it at that. There are multiple versions of what broadband is. And of course, that number increases over time. So again, you can see there's a lot of internet available in the around the lakes and beyond a little bit. But again, not a lot of broadband. This map is kind of the opposite. This map, in a nutshell, is showing you all the red is where there's no broadband available. Now, again, I use the broadband versus internet. There is internet out in here, but it's not what is known as broadband. And here are the various speeds. Depending on today's standard is 25 megabits forward and 3 megabits back or return upload speeds. And then there are the different ones, and Tom can walk you through the reason for all of the different ones and the meaning of all the different ones. But again, this is probably stuff that most of you know anecdotally, if not more firm than that. Around the lake is pretty well served, right? Again, that comes back to, and although it's not showed as such here, that's kind of the MediaCom areas. And then, of course, your population centers as you get outside or away from the lake. This is a map of, and we just changed this one because it used to say broadband. These are all internet providers. Most of these, let me back up a little bit. The FCC came out with a list of addresses that they call BSLs, or broadband service locations. They really should have called them internet service locations, because most of these numbers coming down here, these are the numbers of addresses that these can serve. Most of them are serving internet. Here's a good one, AT&T. They're all copper in Lake County, and so they're DSL, and by definition, they don't get up to broadband levels. So these are all numbers of homes served by these providers, but again, it's internet speeds. I think you can take it from here for now.
Okay. So one of the things that is important to point out, and Dick, actually, if you just go back 2 slides, that one right there, is that the current FCC definition is 25 megabits download, 3 megabits upload. And of course, what's happened over the past couple of years with the funding flowing through the NTIA, then through the CPUC, and again, that will happen again through the BEAD program, which we expect that the money will start being available to the states this summer, but the states have to go through a process to establish how much of that funding they'll be able to get, and then they will feed it again down to the local level. Is that what they're really focusing on is 100 megabits download and 100 megabits upload as a minimum. That will be the speed at which you will have to attest that you can obtain in order to receive funding through the federal and then through the state government. So you can see the challenge here. You've got 8% that are considered completely unserved, so they're less than the current FCC minimum standard. Then you've got 10% that are less than what's considered the current broadband standard, which is asymmetrical. It's still less upload than download. And then you have others that are at or above 100/20. The issue is they're still asymmetrical. Mediacom provides nearly a gig worth of service in the download direction in some of its areas, but is only 35 megabits per second in the upstream direction. So even for them, getting up to the level where they can receive federal funding is going to be, in their case, not so much a challenge, but a process. And we've had discussions with Mediacom. So this is one of the things that we're working on, is this kind of multi-level pursuit of broadband enhancement in the county, getting those that are the least served, literally leapfrogging them up into what's considered the service level of the future, at least 100/100. So I just wanted to kind of tie all that up, because you'll see how that affects, when we get to seeking funding, how that affects where you put the priorities for seeking funding to continue to expand and enhance service. Okay. All right. Thanks, Dick. All right. So the other part of this is you do have a number of areas where broadband is available, but it's lowly adopted. In some cases, less than 40% adoption rate. And the federal government has defined a number of covered populations which it considers need to be focused on in order to increase digital inclusion or to establish more digital equity. And they've also, there's a number of out of the $65 billion or so that's allocated nationwide under the BEAD program, most of it's for deployment. Most of it's to help fund more infrastructure, and infrastructure that will achieve at least 100/100 capability. But there is a substantial amount of funding that will also flow through the states, but also be available to local governments directly on enhancing adoption. And they've just determined that these covered populations are the ones that typically face adoption issues. So that's those with low income, or individuals living in low income households, seniors or aging individuals, incarcerated individuals, veterans who typically have a variety of issues, sort of have what we would consider multi-factors related to the digital inequities they face. Individuals with disabilities, all forms of disabilities, whether it's a sight disability, a hearing disability, an intellectually challenging disability, those kinds of things. Dick, next slide. English language learners, those that either have a very limited knowledge of English, so it's their second language, or are struggling to comprehend and primarily rely on their origin language. Individuals with low levels of literacy, we typically look at educational level related to that. Individuals who are members of racial or ethnic minorities, and there are a number of, again, multi-factors that create digital inequities for them. Individuals who primarily reside in a rural area, and of course the rural nature of Lake County contributes substantially, because if it's not available, it also can't be adopted. And so one of the primary issues as you go into the kind of the areas away from the lake, you do have those that would be able to adopt but don't have the service available to them. Children and youth, especially marginalized youth, And finally, individuals experiencing housing instability. If they don't have a primary place of residence, then getting a wireline connection, which is the kind of connection that's going to deliver that 100/100 and higher, it won't be available to them. So one of the things we have been doing is looking at the CPUC's broadband adoption maps, and this is their map for Lake County. It's as of 2021 data, and so the CPUC will be working as it gains more data and builds its state digital equity map. It will update this. So you can see that a number of, and the lower adoption rates are in the brown and then the red, sort of the rust brown and the red. You can see that some of these are going to naturally be related to availability. If you recall, the map that Dick showed in the very beginning that had a lot of the red as you went out towards the extremities of the county. But there are areas that do have availability and yet have low adoption, including some areas near the lake. And in some cases, it's very low adoption. In other cases, it's lower adoption than you would anticipate based on the availability of broadband in those areas. So what we've started to do, and Dick showed you the multiple layers that we can look at together, lay on top of each other, start to look at it geographically, through a GIS system. One of the things we did is, and again, this is just kind of the rudiments of this analysis, because we've, and I'll talk about how we're sort of honing in on these factors in a second. But we took one that was, part of the aging population and those with no computer or no device. And you can kind of see how, if you look at the low adoption areas, in some cases, those match up with an aging population, those that don't have access to a device. In other cases, you're going to see higher adoption than you would anticipate. And so there has to be another factor that's contributing to adoption issues in that particular area. Okay, Dick, want to go to the next slide. The next slide is one that is typically at the heart of any analysis, is looking at those households that are below the poverty line, because affordability is typically a big issue for them. And again, you can see the darker purple colors are the higher areas with lower income, below the higher percentage that's below the poverty line. And again, you can see how they match up in some cases with the areas with low adoption, but in other cases, not so much. And there might be a number of contributing factors to why those with lower incomes are able to adopt. In some cases, they're taking advantage of the Affordable Connectivity Program. We have a whole layer that shows us in particular census tracts and census blocks who is taking advantage of those programs. In other cases, we might find a lower adoption rate or accessibility rate to those programs. And those are areas we might focus on for education about the availability of those programs. So you can see how it really requires a multi-factor analysis to really get at the heart of it. So Dick, if you go to the next slide, one of the things that we're doing, and we noted this in the 3-page report that we put together, is we're continuing this digital equity data gathering and really casting a wide net here. We've met with the director of the Lake County EDC, but we're meeting with the full Economic Development Commission board next week. We've met with the community development director for the county, but we're meeting with the planning commission later this week. So we're really trying to continue to expand what we're gathering so that we can better interpret this data. Christine had a great meeting with the director of the public libraries and looked at the efforts that they're engaged in spurring adoption and in making broadband access available. So we'll continue that effort. We have still much to go through this month to be able to get data from enough data sources that we really can start to point to in the implementation plan adoption efforts that we think would be successful for the county and funding sources that the county would be able to pursue in order to support those efforts. One of the other big things on the deployment side is the county, through the Golden State Connect Authority and the RCRC, has a local agency technical assistance grant through Tilson Technologies and Utopia. They are, as we understand, finishing kind of their high-level analysis and will be seeking a meeting later this month with the county and CBG to talk about where they think certain deployment efforts should be focused. They are squarely focused on fiber to the premises infrastructure. And so it'll be interesting to see where they think that could be deployed cost effectively and then kind of match it with what we're seeing. One of the big things on the CPUC side is that they have finally, just as of last week, revamped their priority area mapping system completely, issued the map user guide, and they are encouraging local governments, their consultants, the people that they're working with, providers, to take a look at that map because they're going to award more points as you seek use of the federal funding account money that has been allocated, over $28 million in Lake County's case, and the competitive process to obtain that funding and then roll out services. And that's one of the things that we'll be doing in June, is we'll be working with the county and potential providers. Dick will be out in the county. He'll be meeting with ISPs. He's already talked to a number of them. And we'll be looking at potential partners to work with the county, where the county would provide kind of the public policy goals and the direction, and the possible partners would build the systems and deploy the services, and make the best use, take the best advantage of that $28 million to start to fill in some of these gaps. Beyond that, as we indicated, Dick, you want to go to the next slide? As we indicated, we'll be in the stages where we'll finish the information gathering late this month or early June, and then we'll be able to draft the initial master broadband plan update. We'll vet it through the county staff that we're working with, and other stakeholders, and then present a final report, most likely in July, that we'd come back to the Board of Supervisors and present. This would lead right into the broadband implementation plan, where we'll really kick it into higher gear in June. That will be ongoing work, working with the ladder grant contractor, working based on the information we've found, working regionally with the Upstate California Connect Consortium, working with a number of the stakeholders to really fine tune and hone an implementation plan, a multi-year plan that would take advantage of the funding that's still coming down the pipe. Ultimately, the goal is to get the capability, the availability for everybody to meet the federal and state standard of 100/100 or higher, and then to be able to have the mechanisms in place where adoption is an issue once availability is there, to be able to support adoption efforts so that you would have ubiquitous broadband throughout the county. It's a goal that's substantial, takes a lot of work, a lot of people rowing in the same direction, but it will be achievable, we believe. So that's it for our status update on the update. And we know you probably have a number of questions, so feel free to, we'll open it up for questions.
Did you have anything else?
I don't have anything further to add, but our contractors will look forward to your questions.
Yeah.
We're here to listen.
Well, I really appreciate this update and looking forward to the master plan in July. Do we have questions at this point? Supervisor Spatier?
Appreciate the update. I know I was just recently at a CSAC conference and came back home from that conference with some questions on where we were. I knew that we were kind of not ahead of the game, but we had a master plan already to begin with. We obviously needed to update it, review it, dust it off. I do have some questions as far as, I want to make sure, I think the last time that we met, I discussed the fact that we put together an asset list of our buildings and our water towers and other points of interest to maybe look at some wireless connections using those things. Is that something that you've received and have been able to implement, or is that not useful in this process?
We have been able to map a number of assets. I don't believe that we've received that particular data set, but we can certainly work with Matthew to get it. One of the issues that we're going to have is the state of wireless technologies is such that those that are providing it are having trouble in the upload direction, not so much delivering more than 100 megabits downstream, but being able to deliver it symmetrical. So we do find that the state and the federal government give real priority to wireline, especially fiber optics to the premise connections. That doesn't mean that we're leaving wireless out. One of the things that we're doing is looking at the current wireless providers, because we also know that there's stair steps to being able to do this based on, the cost. We'd be happy to implement that as a layer in the map. Dick will be meeting with some of the wireless providers, looking at their capabilities. One of the things that happened, I think since we last talked in December and now, is that Etheric, who had a very successful platform in some areas of the Bay, and especially down in the communities right around the Bay, was decertified by the FCC. They were not able to prove to the commission that they were going to be able to meet 100/100 uniformly delivered to residents, right? Residents and businesses. And so there are no longer any Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. We have that layer built in, but there's no longer any awardees that have been certified by the FCC. Starlink is gone again, and it's all based on this upload capability, LTD and Etheric. So we are taking into account all the residents and businesses that they were going to serve. And again, we know that the latter grant contractor is squarely focused on fiber to the premises, but the technology changes all the time. One of the things that you notice is that T-Mobile has been very aggressive in putting assets in place so that they do have coverage over the broadband service locations within the county. However, they have not been able to prove that they could meet 100 megabits symmetrical on a uniform basis, except in areas where they can put a lot of antenna assets very close together. We're talking about, in some cases, as close as 100 feet together, or 100 feet between each other. We will be talking with them. We did receive some information from them in another project, which was interesting, and forecast not only enhanced 5G, but 6G at some point. So long story short, or the short answer to your question is, yes, we're still looking at wireless, and we haven't received that data set, but we'll be happy to build it in as a layer, because I think there will be a role for wireless going forward.
And I appreciate that, and you answered my other question about the RDOF, because I knew that I've been a part of a couple meetings with, I think it was LTD and Etheric, and was kind of curious where we were, because the money had not been released yet. Had no idea that they had been disqualified. I knew Starlink had been disqualified, but that's not good news. That's more hurdles for us to overcome. The 100/100, in my opinion, is kind of difficult to deliver. It seems more like an urban request than a rural request. Our topography and our lack of centralized communities. We're spread out. We're in very remote locations. We're going to have to figure out how to get that, and we're not going to be able to put wired all the way to every single person here. I want to highlight something that I keep getting a no answer, but I'm going to keep highlighting it because I believe in it. Our mountain, Mount Canocti, is an important asset for our law enforcement and first responders in order to have antennas and repeaters throughout the county. I just think that that's a potential asset and opportunity to utilize as well to reach as much as we can in our entire county. It's not the tallest mountain in the area, but it's definitely a centralized area for a lot of people. So appreciate the work that you're doing. I do want to, the timeline that you provided for June, July, do you know how that differs from the timeline from all those who are working in relationship with RCRC? Is it ahead of their timeline? I'm just trying to figure out how can we kind of beat them to the finish line, so when we're looking to get the investments actually done, that we're not competing with the rest of the counties in the state of California.
Right, and I know that's a big issue. I think in the case of the federal funding account, those funds have already been allocated to the county. They can't be reallocated to anybody else. The issue there is who will apply for them, and you could have, when you look at the different priority areas, and we're becoming familiar with some of those, which are really on the cusp of the served areas now, right? The easiest to expand to. You could see some competition for those funds. We know in other counties there will be, say, between AT&T and a cable operator. I think that's less likely in Lake County. We think Mediacom may be the most likely to go after them because the Latta grant contractor won't be ready with any kind of design by that time, and that would be Tilson and Utopia. Because Utopia, once sort of embedded in the county and throughout the counties, would be able to go after those funds. They're not a provider themselves, except of middle mile services, but they do host a number of ISPs and could go in with them. So I think your bottom line is I think you're well positioned to be involved in the process to work with a provider to go after those $28 million for areas that the county really wants to see built. And I think that will be part of our job. And that funding, that portal opens in June. So we're actually sort of wheeling around, and that's one of the reasons we want to meet with the Latta grant contractor. We want to work with the county directly, and one of the reasons Dick is going out there in June to meet with Mediacom and others, so we can kind of help steer that process, which I think will be very helpful to getting deployment in the areas that need it and being able to serve the most people for that $28 million. Beyond that, yes, you won't see the BEAD money flow down through the state because they've got to go through the same process that they did with the ARPA funds, is they've got to figure out how to allocate them. Much of this is dependent on the state's middle mile, and remember, they're yet to build it, but Lake County is one of the first, I believe, 15 segments to be built, 15 or 18 segments to be built of the state middle mile statewide. That will give you a leg up because that middle mile is critical to be able to expand last mile from that, because the provider won't have to build that middle mile. It'll be there for them. So you will be well positioned because that funding won't be available, we don't believe, until to the localities until 2024. And all of this will be done by that time. You'll have the master plan update, you'll have our implementation plan, and we'll actually be then working with you on the next phases of that, which are continuing to seek funding.
Thank you for that. And my last question is actually for our supervisors here, and maybe also for you, Tom. I see here that you're meeting with Lake EDC, you're meeting with the cities. I'm going to assume that our tribal partners also have access to resources for broadband. Are we working together as a whole entire group in Lake County to see how to best manage the deployment of new broadband? Just kind of wanted to check in to see if that's happening.
Yeah, from our perspective, yes, we're really just at the beginning of that effort. In fact, I see that Terry Logston is on the Zoom, and one of our key contacts, and Matthew's already made that introduction. That's one of our next steps. Also, we understand that meeting with the EDC, that the Tribal Health Organization is part of that. And we're going to ask the board members to help us distribute some pretty targeted organizational surveys that will allow representative organizations to feed us back information on what their businesses, what their constituents are finding. And that process will start next week, right after the EDC meeting, the EDC board meeting. So yes, we are moving in that direction and expect to be much farther along by the end of this month on that process, working with the tribal and other organizations.
Thank you.
Did you want to respond? Vice Chair?
Michael had his
Okay.
thing up for
Oh,
me.
I
I'll
thought you had a
respond
question. Okay.
Okay. You know, thank you for that. Obviously, thank you, Bruno, too, because thinking the same thing. You know I can't speak for all 7 tribal nations, but there is a similar path that we are all on with broadband through NTAI, FCC, working with the state also. So there are 7 tribal nations here in Lake County. If you could reach out directly, it'd be greatly appreciated. Tribal Health is an organization that we're all part of, but you can find each and every one of our websites, I think, online. You can reach out there for some consultation. There is a lot of work right in step with what's happening here in the county at the tribal organizations for both fiber, microwave systems, and the dollars are starting to flow. So if we can coordinate all of that, hopefully we can bring all the dollars and maximize both the federal and the state dollars coming into Lake County as we build these systems out. Because we have been applying, at least for the last couple of years, and being prepared just like Lake County is with an overall plan to really intensify the broadband capabilities in Lake County. And not just for our tribes, as we always do. We look at our surrounding communities, study the gaps. I'm learning a whole bunch in the internet or broadband conversation, but hopefully we can coordinate all those efforts and just bring more light to Lake County as all government organizations, including the cities and the counties. So I know what's happening. I can't speak for the other side of the lake, but I do know we're all having similar conversations because I see them on the consultation meetings that are happening at the federal level.
Okay, Supervisor Green?
We'll definitely do that. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the information. Just want to clarify from my understanding, 100, I get that's the goal, and maybe that is the definition of broadband, but that's a big lift, and we are a rural county where some of these lesser technologies that may not qualify as broadband, quote unquote, under the federal funding, may actually still serve as improvements, vast improvements over existing internet in our areas. So I just wanted the briefest of brief introductions, how 100, where they identified what you did too, the difference in lift in this evolving technology between upload and download speeds, but I'm just trying to justify in my own mind that we need 100 in the farthest reaches of our county, to what end? You know, so we can upload TikTok videos more efficiently, or if we have unmet needs, that 100 is absolutely the bottom line that we need to establish in those far-flung areas. So is there a briefest of brief explanations you can share how the federal government reached that lofty goal and attached so much funding to it?
Sure, yeah, and I think part of the plan update will be explaining the applications that 100 will provide, and really even for just one sort of aside, for community anchor institutions, the goal and the requirement for funding, to serve libraries, government institutions, educational institutions, is a gigabit symmetrical. There, it's pretty intuitive because you've got, in each school, hundreds of students, in libraries, You've got a number of people trying to access the internet as well as the internal operations, same with government facilities. So there is a real need for symmetrical communication. The NTIA believes that that is the future of communications, is that we'll be doing many things online, and that will require a much stronger upload capability, communications out from the house, communications out from small businesses. That could be, anything from running a business at home to telecommuting, but telecommuting in a world where we're dealing with, higher capacity graphic requirements. We're using GIS systems at home. We're automating our homes. But one of the biggest drivers, which is really kind of intuitive when you think about it too, is that all the younger generations are electronic savvy, and it's not so much from TikTok and gaming and those kind of things, but it's from the work that they do. Whether they're students, whether they're working from home, even in the beginning of their careers, the fact that everybody is sharing the same capacity going into the house, right? So it even puts, what's the word? It puts a real focus on increasing the download. For example, Mediacom is positioned to go from, it currently has well more than 100 in the download capability. Its problem is the upload capability, and it has to do some reconfiguration in system, but a lot of it's going to be software based on the new DOCSIS standard. That's the term for it in the cable world, which will enable that 100 megabits upstream, but they may still provide a gigabit, 2 gigabits in the downstream direction because of all the people sharing from any particular home location. So I think that's the focus of the NTIA, is they see more communications coming from the house. And we do know, for example, that in cases where people are teleworking, they've often had to, especially when, because it's a contention-based service. I mean, you've all heard, when kids come home, how in a cable modem-based world, you can't do the work that you did because everything slows down, right? Well, the thought is, too, that as you're upgrading this capacity, you'll overcome those blocks as well. And so the upstream capacity, it may never reach the levels of the download capacity needed, but it's certainly more than 35 megabits, which is about what cable can achieve right now.
Well, I think you bring up an excellent point, and of course the question is, what's enough and what is going to survive the immediate future of the next few years? I think in the past, some of the money that's been spent from the federal level financed technologies that were just fine right now, but 2 or 3 years from then, all of a sudden they're really not that good anymore. So that's the question: is how much is enough? How much is more than what we need? And I'm not sure anybody has that, crystal ball to be able to answer that. Ultimately, I do think that wireless will have a place to the exact locations that you're talking about, 3 miles off the road kind of stuff. And whatnot. There will be a place for that.
Thank you. And the goal is that we have equity across our county for those that live in the incorporated areas and the rural areas. We have large businesses way off the beaten path that have no access now. We have home businesses tucked way up in the forest. So it's important to have this equity. If we don't have any more comments from the board, I'm wondering.
I know that Supervisor Simon had mentioned about the Native American communities. In District 3, I've reached out to some of the tribes there. They're already involved. I tried to connect them with Pat Blacklock, and they said they're involved. So they're doing basically their own work to obtain that. So.
Great. So do we have anybody in the public who wishes to comment? Chief Duncan.
Good afternoon. Sorry to get in the way of lunch. Paul Duncan, CAL FIRE, South Lake County Fire, redundancy and hardening. So a big factor for emergency services is being able to access internet connectivity. We have one fiber feed that comes in the county, and if it's impacted to Mediacom, we lose broadband throughout the county. So when we're working on this, and I appreciate all the contractors' work with this, something that's important to us is maintaining that connection and having a pathway that in the event one feed is impacted, that we have the ability to connect in those emergencies. So hardening is the other part. So any communication infrastructure should be hardened around it, because there's a potential for fire to impact just about anywhere around here. So if we're not preparing those sites and those lines, that we're setting us up for failure. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Good point. Do we have anyone else in the chambers or in the Zoom room?
Nothing in the Zoom.
Okay. This is it. Did you have one more?
Just one final comment. I believe we have 2 fiber feeds, because I thought that the K through 12 has access to one and the colleges have access to a different one, because right in the city of Clear Lake, right next to KC and Woodland, they're like 100 feet apart. And I want to make sure that this group here knows about that potential, because if we can make a connection between the 2 fiber feeds, because I know I've been involved in that conversation between Canocti Unified and Woodland Community College, that would create a lot of the redundancy that we may need, and it may be as simple as just a little bit of undergrounding work in that area. I don't know, but that's part of conversations that I've been involved in the past, but I don't believe that connection's ever been made.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming today. We look forward to coming back in the very short near term.
Okay.
To the master.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.